In Europe, people are having fears drummed into their heads about an inevitable clash with Russia that supposedly one must prepare for a big war. Various figures who seemingly held or still hold responsible positions have apparently simply forgotten about their responsibility. They are guided by some fleeting personal or group political interests, and they are increasingly raising the level of hysteria.
The level of hysteria, that is something that President Vladimir Putin says that the West is having against Russia. The question is it really hysteria against Russia, or is it the reaction from Europe? Is it a just response to what the Russians have been doing before? It's always a question of where's the antecedent, which came first and which was an action and which was a reaction. To try and help us, sort out fact from fiction today, we have back with us on the show Alastair Crooke, former British diplomat and MI6 officer with decades of experience in the Middle East and European security affairs. He also served as a senior advisor to the European Union and was the founder of the Conflicts Forum, which you can find on Substack. And he just got back from China, which we're going to talk about here in just a few minutes. But first of all, Alastair, we're always delighted to have you on the show and really appreciate you being here.
Always a pleasure to join you. Thank you.
Well, listen, let's just jump right into this issue here, especially with Putin, because there's been a lot of pretty big claims and counterclaims going back and forth about this issue here, that Putin is slamming the West as a war hysteria, et cetera. But then you have, and especially just in the last 48 hours or so from the UK side, lots of claims from the new MI6 director, saying that we're facing this big threat from the Russians. One of the the air marshal for UK is saying, hey, we need to be ready to sacrifice. British families need to be ready to sacrifice even in fighting with Russia if it comes down to that. Why in the world is there so much hysteria going between the two right now after nearly 4 years of war?
Well, earlier this month, I was in Moscow for a few days, and I was asked about this quite extensively because people in Russia don't really understand it. And I tried to sort of explain as best I could that really there is no way that Europe is ready or capable of going to war with Russia. It first of all, it just doesn't have the money, it doesn't have the armory, and it doesn't have the people, the men, the forces to go to war with Russia, which is a big state. And so I was really asking, so what's really happening? Because the other thing that makes it so unlikely, two things. One is the fact that there is no trust for the leadership. The poll rating of Merz and Macron and Starmer are, just barely above double digits. They are not respected and they are not liked. But the other thing is that Western culture, Western European culture, is not a militarized one now. It may have been 80 years ago, but it certainly isn't now. Young people are not thinking about going to war with Russia. They're thinking about where they're going for their holidays. They're thinking about what designer shoes they want to buy. They're just not culturally adjusted to this and won't want to do this, and nor will their parents want to send them anywhere near a front line. They've seen what happens in Ukraine. So what's going on? Well, I think there's two elements to it, really. I think the first element is that this is a misguided idea of the European Union, particularly Merz and von der Leyen and Weber, the third person who's important in the parliament, all three of them Germans, who believe that this is somehow pressure on Russia to accede to the European, wishful thinking about what will be a solution for Ukraine. And it is wishful thinking. They've stuck everything into it. It would be basically the proposal that the Europeans have come up with essentially would be NATO-ization by another name of Ukraine. It would be NATO-style troops, European troops there. It would be a ceasefire. And of course, it would be just a deal. Now, Putin has made it very clear that Russia doesn't want a deal. What it wants is to address the core issues, not just address the symptoms of this conflict. And that means it's got to be a structural rearrangement of European security architecture. And that has to be done with the United States. Well, none of the latter is in these proposals. And then afterwards, we had Zelensky saying, first of all, there will be no de jure, no de facto relinquishing of any territory. Zero, no relinquishing of any
good luck
territory
with that, I guess I'll say.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, this isn't going to fly so at all. I mean, I don't know. I mean, this is the most bizarre negotiation. I really don't know what Trump was doing, sending Witkoff and Kushner to talk to the Europeans. What did he think? That they were going to come up with something constructive? Of course not. They came up with every spanner in the works at every level of this agreement about security guarantees, about territory, about the very fact that it's got to be a ceasefire so that, and it's quite clearly designed, really as sort of time out, a little break so that Europe and can go back and rebuild the Ukrainian forces and have a rest and have a little bit of respite, rebuild them, rearm them, retrain them. It says it in the document that that's the intention. And then to start the war again in 2 or 3 years' time. So it's not going to go anywhere. So I do not know really why Trump, what he expected from this. I mean, Europe has been consistent throughout this period. Every time they've come back and said, no, we don't agree to a final solution. No, we want a ceasefire on these lines. No, we don't accept territorial transfers. No, we don't accept there is no role for NATO in the whole process. And Zelensky said last night, and he said, we're making a huge concession. We're not going to demand NATO. But actually, the Ukrainian constitution writes in it that that is the aim of Ukraine, is to join NATO. And he very obviously did not agree to taking that phrase, that paragraph out of the constitution. So yes, he says, well, we're not aiming for NATO now, but it's in the constitution. It's in the constitution that they must constitutionally join NATO. So, you know, the whole thing. So I don't know what he wanted. But anyway, I think this is some misguided idea from people that are really hyped up in Europe, that this is pressure on Putin, and this will help to make Putin concede to this proposal that they have so much changed in these last few days. Anyway, Putin's spokespeople have said very clearly, no, there's going to be no change. We won't accept these.
And in fact, overnight, actually this morning in Europe, in European time, Putin didn't just have some of his lieutenants go forth and say this stuff. He said some of the same things himself. And in this clip we have right here, it's interesting that he's still, even with all of the dysfunction you just described so ably, he's still interested in and willing to talk negotiations and diplomacy, but
this is a lie. Nonsense, simply nonsense about some imaginary Russian threat to European countries. But this is being done quite deliberately. The truth is that Russia has always, in the most difficult circumstances, as they say, to the very end, while there is even the slightest chance, strived to find diplomatic solutions to contradictions and conflicts. And the responsibility for the fact that these chances were not used lies entirely with those who believed that they could speak to us in the language of force.
Is he being hyperbole there about saying, "Hey, we're willing to talk, but it's the other side that keeps sabotaging it," or is it accurate? What does the ground truth say on that?
Oh, it's quite clear. He means it. I mean, it doesn't mean that he's about to concede on the basic security points of Russia at all, quite the converse. But what it means is that both he and China see the need to have some sort of relationship with the United States. Indeed, one of the things that I heard recently in my travels in both Moscow and in China, not specifically laid out in this way, is it was no accident that the meeting took place in Alaska between Putin and Trump. The purpose, and I wrote about it at the time, was really I mean, Putin tries to understand Trump and tries to understand how to, if you like, best approach him. And so he intended it to be in Alaska because Alaska has huge resources, oil, materials, I mean, raw materials, everything, gas. And the aim was to say, look, Mr. Trump, here we are. Look around you. We can share in this. We can have a joint project. And that was, I think, the intention. But at the same time, I think the intention actually is even broader. My sense is, and I can't claim that this has been specifically said to me by an authoritative source, but actually China and Russia see the aim being to have some sort of relationship with America, and it can be founded in the idea of joint exploration of the Arctic in the north, Russia, China, and America. And this would be a new power bloc, if you like, coming into being. Would this appeal to Trump? I think they've been trying to entice Trump towards seeing this. But I think, you know, the risk is that Trump is not a free agent in this at all. He doesn't have agency. There are higher layers above him, and they don't want Russia to appear to have been prevailed in this conflict. Nor does Europe. Europe particularly does not want that. And I think at some point the Europeans became really Manichaean. And have sort of now talking about good and evil, and you know, that Russia is evil, worse than Hitler, using all these languages. And there is in that, I have to say, in the European version of it, a sense of messianism. It's messianic. It's, you know, trying to suggest that we're in this war and of good and evil, of light versus the dark. You remember when Biden gave that speech, first of all, he gave that speech at Liberty Hall, and it was, you know, bathed in red light, and it was all about darkness and light. And then he did it again at Warsaw, and von der Leyen then repeated it, almost word for word, about how, you know, we were fighting evil. This was good. And this is part of, if you like, the Christian inheritance of some form of messianic thinking. Now, I think that, so there is that in it as well, because some of them are deadly serious. I mean, like the Germans are deadly serious that they want to see a humiliating defeat inflicted on Russia. They want that, and they want it, I don't think for any rational reason, any military reason, because as I say, it just doesn't make sense militarily that Europe can possibly go to war. But I think this is something that has another layer to it yet. Sorry to do different layers, but the third layer is the situation facing Europe is, put it bluntly, catastrophic. really catastrophic now. The national security statement was very plain that United States and Europe are on separate paths. Merz said just the other day, he said, listen to an audience, German audience, he said, Pax Americana's finished. It's over. We mustn't be nostalgic. We just have to accept it. It is what it is. It's finished. This is the end of a era. He was implying, the breach is complete. And of course, if there's no Pax Americana, what is NATO? What would be the point of NATO? What would NATO be? So this is really catastrophic in their view. And I think they're all also looking at the economic situation, deteriorating, cost of living rising dramatically, people's standard of living collapsing. I know this is somewhat similar to what's happening in America too. The cost of living for ordinary Europeans, well, not just ordinary, really up to except the gilded elite, is collapsing badly, and they are desperate. And the Europeans don't know what to do about that. Now, the only time I recall, the only sort of parallel was I remember Roosevelt during the war and in the 30s, just couldn't get unemployment down in America from 20%. And saying to Churchill or someone like that, look, I've tried everything, money tools, fiscal tools, which just stubbornly stays up there. And the only thing that would bring it down, of course, is war. And that would bring down the unemployment. So I think there's a mix of those sort of motives that underlie it. But I do think, and this is very important, and I keep saying that, both in my trips, it's very important to understand and do due diligence on really what Europe is doing. It can't do a big war against Russia. It doesn't have any of the elements for it. In fact, it has the opposite. It has lots of elements that are against war, if you like. The culture, the tradition is against this war at this time. But what they might be trying to do, and what is possible, is that they're looking for some form of event that could be staged, maybe in that narrow Baltic passageway, where Estonia has a rock in the middle of it, where shipping has to pass, or in the Black Sea, as we saw the attacks on 3 tankers in the Black Sea, to stage some sort of exercise that they can then go to Trump and say, "Oh my God, it's Pearl Harbor. We have to do something. You have
well,
to."
and that it seems that stage is being set here just the last couple of days by Kaja Kallas, the so-called chief diplomat of the European Union, as she warned, I think it was on Monday, that holy cow, Russia will be coming for us if we allow Ukraine to fall.
Why countries want to be in NATO. If this is out of the question, then we need to see what are the security guarantees that are tangible. They can't be, papers or promises. They have to be real troops, real capabilities, so that Ukraine is able to defend itself. We have to understand that Donbas is not Putin's endgame. If it gets Donbas, then the fortress is down, and then they definitely move on with taking the whole of Ukraine. If Ukraine goes, then other regions are also in danger. We know this from the history, and we should learn from history.
And interestingly, also on Monday in The Independent, there was an interesting article. Gary, if you can put that first full screen up there. Ukraine can win and will win if allies get serious about defense. So despite, Alastair, what has happened for now nearly 4 full years, you still have these what passes for elite thinking in the West, and especially in the UK, as we'll see here even more so in a minute. This author here, Robert Fox, writes, "We have the shadow of war knocking at Europe's door," which is part of the hysteria I think that Vladimir Putin was talking about in our opening. Experts from 7 different branches of the service confirmed that aggressive cyber and information operations by Russia on UK interests have gone up 50% in the last year alone. This message has been underscored by NATO civilian boss, Secretary General Mark Rutte, a hugely experienced Dutch statesman. He said Europe and NATO must be ready for conflict with Russia on a scale our grandparents and great-grandparents endured. Why in the world are we talking after 4 years of war that Ukraine can still win and that we just have to get serious about support? What does he think that has happened over the previous 4 years? Was that not serious?
As I say, what we're dealing with is hysteria and a certain amount of really desperation. Because as I try and say, what happened with the NSS, the strategic statement, in a sense, it said, the war, Russia, we're going to normalize. The United States is going to enter some relationship. It's the interest of the United States to see stability in Europe and a stable relationship with Russia. That was in it. But Europe has bet everything on this conflict. You recall at the outset of it, the Europeans, ministers, were in ecstasy when sanctions were first put and assets were frozen. French minister was saying, it'll be over in a month. The ruble will have collapsed, and looking forward to Putin leaving office. So they've had this sort of wild expectations that Russia was weak and could be easily imploded, and that it would suffer a humiliating defeat. And they would be going back to, Russia of the 1990s, when Russia was in a complete crisis. And Western banks and businessmen were in there buying up the resources of Russia for $1 a go. It was a terrible period for Russia. But this is not like that, and it won't be like that. So, there is this period of hysteria. I believe they're also trying to put huge pressure onto Russia or onto Putin, as they think, to concede. But finally, just to say, Russia has absolutely no interest in coming into Europe. None. I can tell you, after spending time there, actually, they despise the Europeans now. Unfortunately, they despise us. They think we are weak. We're caught up with wokish attitudes, and that they think very little of us. Indeed, they have no desire to take on a petulant European electorate. They've got enough land, enough resources of their own.
And man, if that wasn't including Ukraine, it certainly is now. I wonder if you can, and I'm going to show here a soundbite from Volodymyr Zelensky. I believe it was yesterday at a speech at the Dutch Parliament. And what you'll see here seems to be illogical on the surface of it, but it's very much consistent and interlocked with the European views. And that is, if this person, can you still see me?
We can't see you, Danny, but we hear you.
Okay, I'm not sure. I seem to have lost my camera. Let me work on that in just a second. But let's set this situation up here. In that, first of all, you have a country that has been ravaged through 4 years of war, is losing its ground troops, doesn't have enough men to bring it in, and the Russian side has millions more troops, men from which to draw, and a defense industrial base that can't be matched at any time in the foreseeable future. And yet, given all that, here is Volodymyr Zelensky's claim right now.
That's exactly where the real path to peace begins. It's not enough to force Russia into a deal. It's not enough to make it stop killing. We must make Russia accept that there are rules in the world and that it cannot deceive everyone. This is the path to lasting peace. Ladies and gentlemen, together with partners, we are working not only to stop the bloodshed, but to change the situation along Russia's borders so there is no opportunity to start another war. And we understand that criminals don't change in a day. That's why the talks these days are not only about ceasefire, but about security guarantees. This is not only about diplomacy, not only about physical security. It's also about making Russia finally learn to live by the rule of law.
Yeah, you know, that just seems so irrational to me on the surface of it, that the side that I just showed you is on the definite deteriorating side, on the lower end of the balance of power. They can't rationally ever reverse the situation here, and they haven't succeeded in the last 4 years. And yet he's talking as though he's in the position of Putin. Somehow he's talking like he's talking down to Putin, that you will not be just forced into this. You'll be forced into that. You'll give me security guarantees, you know, basically, etc., which kind of matches what Mark Rutte is saying, which Ursula von der Leyen, Kaja Kallas, we just saw a minute ago. What in the hell is wrong with these people that they're still talking this way? Because it seems to me, and as a British former diplomat, you can talk about this. It seems to me those kind of statements would make it nearly impossible for Russia to agree to anything because they're in the position of power. So what does that tell you about the current level of negotiations?
Let me translate what he was saying for you, because I've heard it before coming out from other people in Europe, in Brussels. And they're saying there can't be peace until we have seared the consciousness of Russia, taken away from them their militaristic thinking. They have to be completely de-radicalized. They have to go through a psychological process which will cleanse them of all these bad characteristics which they have. That is really something that is a current within Europe. And so that's what he was saying, he said it wasn't just enough to defeat them. It wasn't enough to force a defeat on Putin. He's saying it has to go further. They have to be psychologically changed to be good Europeans. They have to be psychologically, if you like, de-radicalized and made acceptable as Europeans. That's what he was saying then. It's a very frightening exercise. In other words, and I've heard it in the Israeli context, someone, Rod Dermer, was talking about the Palestinians. And he said, look, with the Palestinians, it's not just that they have to be all disarmed. They must be, but they have to be de-radicalized too. And the person who interviewed said, well, excuse me, but what do you mean? What exactly does de-radicalized mean? And he said, well, look, at the end of the Second World War in Germany, it was de-radicalized. And of course, an even better example, Japan, at the end of that war, the Japanese were docile and compliant with the United States authority. I mean, and he said that in those terms. I think that is what you were hearing from Zelensky in slightly more coded terms. But that was the import of what he was saying.
So, which you can't, you lose in that World War II scenario against the Germans. They were militarily destroyed and there was nothing left of the military at all. So you could impose that on them. Not quite the same dynamic here, where it's almost like the defeated Germans trying to tell the invading Soviets, we're going to de-radicalize you. How does that work in the minds of the Europeans today with that power imbalance?
Well, it doesn't. I mean, there's, I keep saying this in the context of the Israeli side. I mean, it seemed to me 10 years ago that it was not possible to go on thinking about politics in the Middle East, the Israeli-Palestinian context, through secular, largely rational eyes. You had to understand that this was becoming an eschatological issue. It was taking on messianic connotations. And with messianism, you can't say radically, look, this doesn't make sense. Why would Israel want to do this? Why wouldn't it want to do this? It's wanting to do it because it wants Armageddon. It wants the big battle. It wants the crisis to come. Precisely. That's what they want, because that will change the situation, and this will bring about redemption and Israel in the process. And so I was saying a few years ago, I was starting to say, you have to look at the eschatology about what happened to the Amalek and what happened in the Jewish messianic shift that took place when they believe that they're moving towards redemption. And I'm not suggesting that we're in quite that stage in Europe, but there is a touch of it. There is a small element of that messianic element, is that we have to impose upon Russia a deprogramming, a psychological cleansing that will allow Russia to be part of the future. And it don't ask me and tell me it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense in any sort of rational way, but it makes sense to people who have that sort of Manichaean view of good and evil. And that,
yeah, but so let's go down that path, because that is still puzzling to me. You can have this desire. You can say, I think that Russia is the evil empire. They still are, and I want to de-radicalize them. But then you have to go, and what do I have in my hands, and what do they have in their hands? Well, oh snap, they have bigger hands. They have more of them. I don't have enough, so I can't do it. It just seems irrational to me that I can't connect with elite thinking in Europe that says, I want this so bad that even though I can rationally say that the balance of power is out of kilter for me and I can't actually compel them, but I'm going to still try anyway, even though I have now years of failed experience. How does that work?
Pearl Harbor. That's what they're wanting. They want to bring America into this war against Russia and to make it a major NATO Western. That's why they're starting to conscript people and preparing. And they are convinced that they can pull Trump in. I don't believe it. I don't believe he will. And I don't believe Americans will allow that to happen. But that's the aim, is to pull it into a big war with Russia.
Do they believe then that drawing the United States in, let's say that they were successful, that will enable the hands to get big enough to actually defeat the Russians? Is that what they think?
They think, yes. They think that if America, they have this idea, which, look, it's very, it just doesn't apply today, but they have this sort of idea America can do anything. It has these huge resources, huge military forces. It can take on Russia. They still believe that Russia is weak, that its army is ineffective. Look, all the evidence is the opposite. All the evidence is that Russia is now actually one of the preeminent powers, along with China, is a preeminent power. It has, if you like, the leverage is with Russia. It isn't with even the United States, let alone the United States and Europe. The leverage is with Russia in economic terms, in the military terms, but most of all in the sense that Russians are all behind Putin in a war, if you like, of the sort which they see as an existential war being waged against Russia. So you have to see it in these terms. It doesn't make sense any other way. I agree with you. It doesn't make sense. But that's why you have to see it like that.
Yeah, well, and I'm going to provide some evidence here, which hopefully can peel back some of the blinders off of the people who are listening to this to see just how irrational this is and how potentially suicidal if we keep going down the path. And I'm going to connect the elite thinking in the UK with what's right now and with what was existed about 3 years ago, and show this is a dangerous thing to even listen to this kind of stuff. First of all, Gary, put that second headline up there from the Independent that we had in there. This is saying, this is on Monday. They're saying that Ukraine can still win if in another 18 months, Russia's economy will be all but destroyed, this guy writes. And then he goes on a little bit more, and he says, of course, it needs no reminder that Moscow thought the operation would only take 10 days. So he's, first of all, putting up a straw man, claiming that Moscow intended to win the war in 10 days, which was never true. That was completely made up by us. And he says now Moscow claims that it can tough its way through to victory and surrender in Kiev in another year and a half. Russia's never mentioned anything about a year and a half, so far as I'm aware. If the war lasted that long, Russian economy will be shattered, and even China will be reluctant to pick up the pieces. You can talk about that in a second. Ukraine is on a shorter timeline. It needs to survive the next months, and the Europeans must step up in the delivery of weapons and technology and training, as Mark Rutte has, are exhorting. So his claim here is that all we have to do now, forget about what happened in the last 4 years. All we got to do is just get more stuff. And then finally, even though we've been trying through 19 rounds of sanctions, somehow, magically, Russia is going to collapse. Now, if we stopped right there, you could say, okay, that's not based on a lot of ration, but I don't know. Maybe we should consider it.
They don't believe it. They don't believe what they're saying. There was,
that's even worse.
I recall an American neocon. You'd know his name, but I won't mention this. But he was going to one of those closed-door meetings in, I don't know if it was in Washington, but in the United States, and that there were the intelligence services and the Pentagon and very senior political figures at this meeting. And he was there, and he's a neocon. He's not a liberal or anything like this. No, he's not. He's one, he thought he was like-minded to these people. And he goes there before. I mean, it's not just a once-off thing. And then they started talking about Russian casualties of 1.5 million, and that the economy was collapsing. And he just called out and he said, that's BS. I mean, what you're saying is just absolute BS. What are you saying? It's not true. And he came away from that, and he came away with a conclusion. He said, of course they knew it was untrue. Of course they knew it. But they could not face living in a world in which the West does not give the orders. They couldn't face it. It had to be defeated, even if it made no sense, even if what they were saying was nonsense. So, we're in a different world, and that's what I'm trying to emphasize. One can't simply look at it through a rational lens. You have to look at it and understand that they don't believe what they're saying, but the alternative is so unimaginable for them, so impossible to accept, that they refuse it. And so they go on saying this nonsense. So we are in a sense of, we're in a psychosis, really.
Right, and which is one of the reasons, and that I agree 100%. I mean, the evidence is just stark and overwhelming. But I'm hoping that people can start to see, and one of the reasons I want to show what's about to happen here is that if we listen to this guy Fox and all those who say the same kind of things, that all we need is another 18 months of stuff, and then magic will happen, etc. That's something that Boris Johnson, who when he was prime minister in August of 2022, was saying nearly the same thing. Watch this.
And just as he fatally underestimated Ukraine, he also underestimated the price the world was willing to pay to support Ukraine. We have and we will. Volodymyr, that's why the British House of Commons, all parties, stood as one to applaud you and to support the military, diplomatic and economic support that we are giving to Ukraine. And I'm proud that we've already supplied more arms than any other European country, including 6,900 anti-tank missiles, 5,000 of the NLAWs, 120 armoured vehicles, Starstreak anti-aircraft missiles, anti-ship missiles, and now, of course, the MLRS. And today I can tell you that more artillery, more ammunition is on its way, and 2,000 UAVs.
And Gary, play that second one, because one more thing he said.
I believe that as we come through this winter, our position will strengthen. And with every week, a month that goes by, Putin's position will weaken and his leverage will diminish. And that's why now we must continue and intensify our support for Ukraine.
So he's literally saying the same thing that Fox is saying there. In just a little bit longer, Russia's going to diminish and Ukraine is going to grow. But we know that's August 2022. That presaged the 2023 offensive that the Ukraine side did, which was utterly, completely disastrous and failed totally. And then ever since that time, Russia's been on the offensive here. So at some point, Alastair, this is more a plea than a statement of fact, I guess. Can people that are underneath some of these elites finally recognize that you've been telling us this stuff for years and you've always been wrong? Why are we going to listen to you anymore?
Well, you know, this is precisely the point. It is the elites that are saying this. The European people are not clamoring for war. I can assure you of that. I mean, I live in Italy and there is no desire for war. There's massive protests. All of these things are being played down in the press. The European Union won't allow these things to be published. Massive protests about Gaza as about the war in Ukraine. Now, but what you have to put this in the context is that those elites, they have the sense that if anyone steps out of line, anyone doesn't follow the narrative exactly, then they'll all collapse and they will be finished and over. So it's a real, if you like, desperation to keep together. You listen to what they say. The words are almost identical. Speaking notes are sent out probably every morning, and they say the same thing on each person, every spokesman. And at the moment, the line is, you know, prepare for sacrifice. You may have to send your children off to die on the front. And it's going to be like the First World War with millions being killed. This is going to be a terrible loss. But it is because if one of them steps out of line, apart from Orban, who's been sort of cut away from the main elite structures. But if they step out of line, they feel the whole thing is going to collapse, the whole narrative, because there is no support in Europe for it. They have these big, there was about a month ago, big demonstration in London. It was a Tommy Robinson-led demonstration. Police thought about 10,000 people would turn up. Probably more than 1 million turned up. No one has the exact figures. But people who were in it were saying the language, the feeling of anger against the elites, against the establishment, the language was aggressive, almost pornographic against Starmer and Macron and Merz. Very, very angry. And it's the same. Whether it is in Italy or in Germany, the ground is shaking under these people, really shaking under the people. So what they have to, that's why they come to this thing is that, you know, while they're on the ship, as they used to say, you know, you're on a big yacht. And while you're on the yacht, you have everything you want can be provided, money and drink and food and everything. The moment you start to get off or asked to leave the yacht, you'll be found dead in the water the next day. You should ask the previous owner of the Mirror Group in the UK about that. That's what happens if you ask to leave the yacht. You're finished. You're dead. And so everyone is trying to stick together and stick to this narrative because they feel once one person breaks ranks, then the whole thing will start crumbling and disintegrate.
Wow, that's That's a pretty stark picture there. It certainly seems to line up with what we can physically observe, both on the front lines of the war and in the front lines of the diplomacy and in the internal dynamics of each of the countries. I mean, this is again more of a pleading question than anything else. But at least historically, and can you look back in time and see, is it possible for the elites, even in self-preservation, to say we're going to have to change the narrative here, because at some point this whole edifice will collapse and the yacht will sink and all of you will go down with it and nobody gets off of it if they keep going down this suicidal path?
The only thing that'll change it is events on the ground. That's what changes narrative finally.
So the yacht sinking and all of us going down with it.
Well, it will change and they will sink. There will be, I would predict to you that all of these leaders you see at the moment, whether it is Starmer or whether it is Merz or whatever, and von der Leyen, in a year or two, we will be wondering what happened to them. Because, I mean, they have created such a catastrophe. They have taken so many wrong decisions about Russia, about energy supplies. The German economy, which is the driving force of Europe, is in absolute decline. Its industry, they even stopped, their chemical industry, which was a key industry, is in complete decline at the moment. And unemployment is growing everywhere. And the tension over immigration is growing. And the elites don't know what to do about it. And so they keep saying war, 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 because that's the only thing, and if we all say it together, that somehow we can sort of stick together and we can get through this terrible period. But events, people are puzzled that Mr. Putin, goes on saying diplomacy, but he's treading this fine line, I believe, between deterrence and diplomacy. And it's a very fine line. Too much deterrence and you provoke an aggressive response from your adversaries. Too little deterrence, too much diplomacy, and it's weakness, and they will go for you. So he's trying to tread this line, and he has to bring along all the other BRICS with them. And the BRICS have told him that they want a negotiated settlement if it's possible. Well, I think he's demonstrating as clearly as possible that it's not possible.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Show that it's not possible.
Well, listen, I mean, one of our hallmarks of our channel here, not even just this show, is that we are unintimidated and uncompromised to bring the truth, no matter what it is, because people deserve to know the truth. And this is a really ugly truth, but something that people need to know more of, that the elites are driving us all into oblivion, and we'll all sink and go down together if there's not more of these protests, like you mentioned a minute ago, toward the people rise up and require changes before there's disaster on the ground. Because I think without an intervention, that is probably where we're heading. Listen, I want to shift gears here in the last few minutes, because I don't want to let you go before we talk a little bit. You mentioned the BRICS. And one of the probably the biggest member of the BRICS outside of Russia is China, and you just returned from China. And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about what you may have learned there, because I know you had some very interesting observations.
Well, it's difficult to put it in 2 sentences, but I'll try. The Chinese learned from Russia what happened to Russia from 2014 onwards, when it was sanctioned, when there was a currency war waged against it, when the ruble was dropped, the price of oil was dropped down to 0. And the Chinese watched this and they took the message: what you have to do to protect yourself is to become self-sufficient. And you have to ensure that you are not dependent in any way of the United States. And what was clear to me, I'm not a sinologist, but the geopolitics of what has happened in China are just unmistakable. They've achieved that. About 2% of their exports have to go to the United States. China still has to buy aircraft and some chips and software, but very little. It's not dependent any longer. It's self-sufficient, completely in manufacturing. And then the other thing that has changed, which is striking and which people need to understand, I was talking to a major industrialist who has factories across China. And he said, you know, you've got, and others said it to me, you know, your AI, your artificial intelligence, you're doing it completely wrong. And we have done it very differently. So unlike you, where you have these, it was based on military structures of, you know, Palantir and of targeting people that are seen to be hostile. You built up an AI structure which is heavy on data, which demands huge data centers and is very consuming of all data. First of all, the Chinese say, well, you know, you in America, you're going to soon run out of data to consume any longer. But what we're doing and what we have done is simply we have used diffused AI. It's barely AI any longer. It's the application of AI to industrial production, to on the shop floor production. That's how we do this. And we don't spend all this money on this. And what has it done for us? The man who has these factories said, if I take just one of my factories, if a year ago I was employing 2,000 people, it's now 200. Now, that means, I mean, we are super competitive. In 1 year, you know, we are in price deflation in China because of the competitive gain we've had. The effect of this has been so startling that we are really competitive. And what is more, you are in an inflationary cycle. Tariffs and all these things causing America to be inflationary. And they were saying, you know, you can't compete with us. It's, you know, we have overmatch. You can't compete with us at that range. And if you add into that, you know, America's desperate for a success in AI. In China, where electricity is available, unlike in parts of the United States, I mean, available for, you know, mega data centers. A gigawatt of energy in China is 1/6 of the price of a gigawatt of energy that would be available to these big AI giants. And if you wanted to become competitive on that basis, you'd have to devalue the dollar by about 45% to become even vaguely competitive with China on AI or on manufacturing. And why I'm saying this to you is not to extol China particularly, but they deserve, you know, acknowledgement of what they have achieved. It's an extraordinary achievement. But they say, you know, your AI will not have revenue. Ours has obvious revenue because it's open source, open product, and we are getting the advantages, the revenue coming from our competitiveness. And yes, there's some unemployment, but our economy, because of our competitive state, is growing so much that most of these people will be directed, and that is the purpose of the state, is to help them to move into the areas of the economy if they have to leave manufacturing to another spot. But I mean, it changes the strategic position totally. And my message really would be to say, you know, we have to think in the West how to manage this change. We are, you know, it's just impossible. I mean, the United States is just not competitive with China. You can't sell to China at the moment on these on this basis.
What kind of changes would be required? What could we do to properly respond to these evolving conditions?
Well, not go to war, not do something stupid.
Okay. That's a good first place.
Not do something stupid in Venezuela, because China has This is the new war that Trump is starting. It's the war about the next economic model that is going to be prevalent in the world. Is it going to be, the Bretton Woods free trade model, or is it going to be the Chinese vision of an economy in which, if you like, it is the people that count, and not just simply the markets? It's the reversal. In the West, the markets dominate and the people serve the markets. In China, the markets are supposed to serve the needs of China and Chinese as a whole. And they're very different models. And I'm just saying that what needs to be happening, Venezuela is important because, Venezuela offered Trump everything in the summer. He offered him
without violence,
without any violence, and then China in November, I think it was at the Shanghai Expo, China offered Venezuela $1 billion in investments in their oil industry, ports and corridors, and all of these structures, and the NSS said very specifically, in Fortress Americas, the new regional sphere of interest of the United States, we will not tolerate the infrastructure of any competitor in it. It said, we will drive it out, quote, we will drive it out. Only America will have primacy in the state. And so this line of ships, this naval blockade, is about driving out the Chinese infrastructure, loans, corridors, systems of payments.
And
ports,
in fact, let me just
things.
I know we're running low on time, but I'd like your opinion on what do you think about this announcement last night by President Trump that there's a veritable oil embargo against Venezuela, and he's not going to allow any ships to go in and out. Historically, this has been an act of war. How do you see it?
Well, I think China will react to it, and this is why I'm saying, you're in a position now with China. That they have the leverage and you don't. And the best thing is to manage it. But this is not how to manage. This is going to do just the opposite. This is going to put you in contention with China. China is a very powerful state now. It will, I don't think it will just lean over. If you look at the map of the Americas, the Latin America at least, and you just mark the ones that have big exports to China in color red, it's almost all red, just up to Colombia in the north and one other state in the north. And you're going to go and root out all of these Chinese systems of infrastructure from the whole of Latin America. Well, the best of luck with that. It's not going to be pleasant, and it will put you into contest because not only China is there, but Russia is there and Iran is there too. So this is a real, potential time bomb for going off.
So you said China could react. You said China could react based on this oil embargo, and if the U.S. launches military operations, which all the pieces are in place, to do so literally within days. There's an announcement by the President Trump. He's going to address the nation tonight. We don't know for sure what he's going to talk about. One wonders if he's going to make some sort of announcement on that. But it looks like that we may be doing some sort of kinetic activity of some degree here soon. If that happens, or even if it doesn't happen, just based on the oil embargo, what are options for China to react? I mean, I can't imagine they would go to war with the U.S., but what would they do?
No, but they've already put in missile systems, air defense systems. They've already, looked at this, and Russia has done as well. I believe put in air defense systems. I don't know which ones, but I believe they have put in air defense. And Chinese air defense systems, by the way, are really good. As you remember from the Pakistan conflict with India just recently, they took down all the French aircraft. Now, I don't know exactly what they're going to do, but, what happens? Go into Venezuela? You're going to take Maduro and remove him? But then this is a huge country. I mean, look at Iraq. You were in Iraq. I mean, controlling it is...
Oh, wow.
Is
that map you were talking about.
a war. Yeah, there you see it. That's what you're trying to root out. Well, good luck with it. It's not possible. I don't think it's possible because the terrain is terrible. I mean, I have lived in South America. I mean, guerrilla war in the jungles, in the areas, I mean, yes, you can go into the capital and you can take over the capital, but it's a huge country. And if it turns into some sort of war of militias on the ground, I don't know, I'm not military in the way you are. You know better than me how difficult it would be on the ground. And I'm looking at it, the geostrategic picture and saying, this is not something to do because it's going to take you in already. I mean, it's going to be difficult with Russia now after what's happened. Where are we going to go? Escalation against Russia? That seems to me the most likely consequence of this, because I don't think, the powers that be, the higher powers will accept, that Russia is going to emerge as the prevailing, is allowed to prevail against the West there. And they won't allow China to prevail in the Americas. So it's going to, how are you going to manage it? And I would say, the most important thing is really to try and find a level so that this doesn't go up the escalatory ladder into some worse conflict. Try and keep it to the lowest level possible, and to talk to the Chinese and come to some understanding. But you can't have a complete, understanding if you're going to be a maximalist and say, well, no Chinese infrastructure in South America whatsoever, because we put that in the security statement. That won't work. So it means people have got to be more flexible, got to understand how the Chinese think, how Russia thinks, and to try and find a way of managing this so that it doesn't grow out of control.
And let me ask you, from your visit, the one that you just did here in China, did the conversation ever come up about what the Chinese view as the medium and long-term relations with the United States? Did they think that conflict is either possible or inevitable? And if so, is that something they feared?
No, I mean, I would say that the message from it was I was somewhat surprised. I mean, I shouldn't have been, but I was surprised. I mean, they're just very, very confident of their position, and that they have overmatch on the United States, not only economically, but militarily as well. I don't know that side of it particularly, and I wasn't focused on it. But they are very, very confident. And so, their message is, the United States and Europe has to wake up to the fact that, we've been through a Thucydides moment. Leverage has shifted. The West doesn't have the leverage, either in respect to Russia and Ukraine, and it doesn't have leverage economically with AI. Their view is your AI is likely to crash and burn because there won't be revenue from it. And therefore it's overextended, too much debt, and it'll crash and burn, and that'll probably bring about an economic crisis. But they're ready and preparing for that. They have a whole financial ecosphere in China that, they have, if you take WeChat or something like that, Alipay, 1 billion Chinese using it all the time. Not just to pay bills, but to call a taxi and like an Uber or something like that. Everything is on these systems with 1 billion people using them. Imagine how easy it would be just to sort of unfold that across Central Asia. Well, it's already unfolding across Central Asia. I mean, things are changing. And that would be my message, got to really sort of or think carefully about how to manage this change, how to deal with it, and not let it turn into something incendiary.
You know, and that it's assuming you still have time. If you have to leave, I understand. But
I'm okay.
Given your experience and the decades you've been around and involved in international, interstate discussions, it seems to me that the big celebratory moment that we had when we won the Cold War, after we showed a Desert Storm that we were the preeminent military power on the planet. And then the Soviet Union collapses, and at the time, China is still considered by some to be a third world country. We're talking about the early 1990s, and the United States, especially in Europe, right alongside of it, were the preeminent powers in economic and military on the planet, and we could literally do anything we wanted and did pretty much. But I think that, and I'd like your view on this, viewed now from a quarter century later, or even more than that now, about 35 years. It could well be that our reaction to that moment has now laid the foundation for our collapse, potentially economically and militarily, while those other two rise up because we mismanaged it back then. How do you see it?
Oh, I agree entirely in that, that sort of hubris that came out of, this is the end of history, the last man standing. And that the West had won economically, militarily, and culturally. Hollywood and all of this was part of the winning case. And that was so embedded, it has become a real problem, both for Europe and for America, that mindset has got so accepted, has become so embedded, that it's very hard for people to move on. This is what I meant when I said, they just can't imagine a world where that doesn't hold any longer. It's just, would we want to live in that world, is what they would say. No, we wouldn't. But, they have to, because things have changed. And China has learned the lesson and done it and become self-sufficient, and it's got an AI that is actually bringing huge returns and very competitive, and it doesn't want to have American AI. They think this big investment in compute, and even they don't even believe. We're talking with there was a sort of a number of experts there, and they said we don't even believe in artificial general intelligence. I mean, we work on it. But, America is obsessed with it. But we think this it doesn't equate to humanity. It doesn't equate with human intelligence at all. But, I mean, we do that, but we don't sort of put vast amounts of money in it. But, the West is embarking down the wrong path and may well find that they do crash and burn, or at least the Magnificent Seven AI companies do crash and burn, because they won't get revenue just from that, because you've got no industry. You can't do this sort of low-level dispersal of AI at a very straightforward. It's not even AI really. It's sort of a more sophisticated automation type of structure. And that's changing but it would take years to do that now. It would, and it would take a long time for America to move to a self-sufficient type of economy, because you and the West and Britain particularly went down the route of financialization. So it was much better. You made more money sort of arbitraging the dollar against, derivative prices. And you made more money doing that than you would make 3%, 5% on actually building a plant and manufacturing things. So, the real economy has been starved, and the financialized economy has become a huge balloon filled with, the benefits of zero interest rates and credit flowing to hedge funds and to all these. And now you have this huge danger of a shadow financial system, which is 50% of America. And as the BIS said just the other day, we don't know what's in it. we have no idea. There's no regulation of the shadow financial system, banking system. So we don't know what's lurking there.
You say that it would take a long, long time for America to retool this. Well, that would only take a long time if you actually started to change it, which we aren't. Because it seems to me, you tell me what you think, that this elite system that you're literally just describing right there about how they're making money, they chose to arbitrage the currency, et cetera. They prioritize getting quick returns here. They have succeeded and they have benefited tremendous amounts. So they have literally negative incentive to change anything and to ride this out as long as they can. And then when the yacht sinks, to use our earlier analogy, they'll just, at least they think, they'll just pop off and get on another boat and let the rest of us go down with it.
Yeah, because, you know, what it has done, and they're right, you know, the 10%, the 0.001% now own 3 times the amount of wealth as the bottom half of the American households. But what they've done is bifurcate the economy. There's no such thing as the American economy. I keep seeing people talk about the American economy. There isn't such a thing. There's what I call the cornucopia economy of the hedge funds and the money managers and the Wall Street people who don't even have to lift a finger, and the market goes up and they make more and more and more. And then there is the rest of the economy, same in Europe, that is just slowly getting poorer and poorer and poorer because the prices go up and real wages don't go up. There was a terrifying graph that was frightening Wall Street, where they took the start point as the introduction of ChatGPT, and then they had one graph was the increase in the S&P going up 70% since that, and then the other graph falling away, the other vector falling away, job openings down 30%. And even Wall Street looked at that and they said, oh my God, we might be doing wonderfully well, but the rest of the country is not.
And that can't be sustained over time.
No. No.
Well, listen, wow, this was quite an eye opener here. Not just about what China's doing, but about how they're basically making themselves impervious to anything. So in the event, I think, and just to kind of wrap this up a little bit and talk about one last piece of potential ramification from what you're observing here, is that one of the things that happened in the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war is these massive sanctions we had, which initially were devastating to the Russian economy, but then they retooled and then they reoriented so that now then they're no longer susceptible to that kind of pressure. But it sounds like what you're describing is that the Chinese recognize that without being under pressure and under context, so that now then we don't have that leverage in the event, say, that there was a China and Taiwan war or something in the South China Sea. And if we thought, well, we'll just sanction China and crush their economy, we're not going to have that leverage. Is that right?
Exactly. I mean, look how long it took Russia, because, you know, it was in 2007 at the Munich Security Conference. And, you know, Putin said, okay, NATO is going to challenge us. We accept the challenge. And they actually just laughed. All the audience just burst out laughing and said, and they smirked at him. I mean, it was really obvious if you watched it. Yeah, they just laughed at him. And look at it now. And look at what's happened. Russia is not completely self-sufficient like China, but it's self-sufficient sufficiently to survive the sanctions and tariffs being put on it. So it is surviving that. You know, it's, you know, of course, it's not perfect, but I mean, that's what they've done. They've made it, if you like, a self-circulating economy. So what they produce, you know, they buy, and what they buy, they produce. And there's a small layer, which is the export market. But they try and keep it small so that they don't have dependency on any one state and therefore become vulnerable. But it's taken, and China learned that from that period, from 2014. They saw exactly what was happening to Russia. And they said, well, we're going to stop that happening. Self-sufficiency, a closed capital market, so we can't be affected by the US doing, financial warfare against us, changing the level of the interest rates like happened in South America and collapsed the economies there. We're going to have a closed economy, and we are going to concentrate on industrialization, in pan-industrialization, and we are going to apply a very diffused AI, which is going to make it very, very competitive. And they've done it.
Wow. Well, that is amazing and disturbing. And one can only hope that something short of sinking of a yacht or a losing of a war or a fighting of a war we can't win doesn't cause us to have to force that change on us. But using history as a guide and the interest of the moneyed elite, probably not a lot of optimism there.
I'm always, it doesn't gain me many friends, but I'm always one who try and say, it's best to look truth in the eye, because that's the beginning of your way out of the problem.
Amen.
To understand it and then
you're singing our song here, and we praise that that whole idea, and that is the only way. Even though a lot of this information by itself is bad, but unless you are willing to face those and be aware of the level of challenges you face, then and only then can you actually have a shot at avoiding that kind of outcome. So we're very grateful to you for providing that light on the truth today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me on your program. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Always our pleasure. And just listen, if you're like me, you're like, wow, I want to hear a lot more from this incredibly intelligent fellow. Go to conflictsforum.substack.com, where Alastair Crooke puts a lot more wisdom and nuggets of gold out for you to read. Thank you very much. And we will look forward to seeing you guys all on the next episode of the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.